for another episode of Performance Process. I'm Caley Fretz. We've got Ronan McLaughlin on the line as always. Ronan, you also have a special little toy there. You have something fun that you actually had for a while, but was used in today's Giro d'Italia time trial by the Ineos team. What have you got?
We've got a special guest on the podcast. Yeah, we've got a disc wheel. bringing a disc wheel to the show today.
A little bit quiet.
Part of this disc wheel was used by Ineos Grenadiers, and that this is a power core disc with a classified power shift 2-speed internal hub inside the disc wheel, and that classified power shift hub is what Ineos Grenadiers used on today's time trial stage of the Giro d'Italia to effectively allow them to run both the, let's say, optimal drivetrain solution for the flat opening 38 kilometers or whatever it was, and still have the optimal drivetrain set up for the climb up to the finish. And what that looked like was they had 66 tooth chain rings for the flat section, and then by engaging or unlocking the internal hub in this power shift system, that 66 tooth chainring effectively became like a 44, if I remember correctly, allowing them to get up the climb, because had they tried to climb that final climb in a 66 tooth chainring, the chances are they would have been off and walking. And that's kind of that gets to what they were trying to achieve here, is that you want a specific drivetrain setup for the flat in the time trial, but you want an entirely different drivetrain setup for the final climb. And while all the other teams seem to be trying to find the best compromise, somebody at Ineos turned around and said, we're not going to compromise, we're going to have our cake and eat it.
So as you could probably tell from, where we started off this podcast, this little sort of micro episode, this little bonus episode is going to talk about optimization in today's Giro time trial. And the biggest story of the day was this Ineos use of the classified hub inside of a disc wheel. It was pretty effective. Barring Tadej Pogacar, who,
separate race, different story. They finished second, third, and fourth. First, second, and third of the normals.
First, second, third. So Filippo Ganna finished in second, Magnus Sheffield in third, and Thymen Arensman in fourth. They also had Geraint Thomas in 10th. So it looks like it was probably a successful test of this thing.
It was a real return to form for Ineos. I think they've always been good in time trials. Ganna's obviously always been good, but there was a period where, as a team, the result they achieved today wouldn't have been all that surprising. But it feels like of late they haven't achieved those same team-wide results. And I'm sure somebody will pull out some result where they've finished 5 in the top 10 or something recently. But at a Grand Tour time trial today felt like a real step back into the old Team Sky days, where the team would just dominate or stack the top 10. And I'm not saying that's because of the power shift, but I think it certainly helped them.
So let's just dig into that a little bit more. So again, just to sort of reiterate, and I guess kind of dumb it down, which is my job here. The purpose of this was to have a completely different, essentially gear setup on the flat versus on the climb, without having to run a second front chainring and front derailleur, which that's essentially what a double does. Is it gives you two different sets of ratios, right? The classified hub, internal hub, there's a single shift in there, so you can essentially have a high and a low. So they had a high for the flats and a low for the climb. As you said, it doesn't change the gear ratios at all in that high setting, so it kept the 66 for the flat bit, but then you can drop it down to we said 44, 45.
So you have the equivalent. Using the power shift, you effectively get a 0.7. It's like 0.686. A 1 to 0.686 ratio.
Gotcha.
Let's round it up to 0.7 for simplicity, which means that 66 tooth chainring that Geraint Thomas was spotted with becomes effectively like having a 46 inner chainring.
Right. Now, the issue with these things has always been that they add a bit of drag, right? Was that part of the calculation?
So if that depends who you ask. If you ask classified, they will tell you they have done their studies. They've tested this repeatedly, and a white paper they've published is that the classified system is basically 99% efficient in the unlocked ratio. I mean, if you're using it like in the locked position where it's effectively just a standard hub,
so the 66 basically.
Yeah. There are, let's just say for simplicity terms, there are no losses. The question was around what happens when you engage that planetary gear, and classified are adamant that there are no losses. And as we have an article on escapecollective.com digging into all this in much greater detail. And as I explained in that article, classified could have released 1,000 white papers. Nothing would have alleviated any concerns about any losses more than Ineos Grenadiers lining up for a Grand Tour time trial with the classified system in their rear wheel.
And then finishing second, third, and fourth.
And then finishing second, third, and fourth. So we know the pedigree of this team. We know some of the people who work there. We have to assume that they have tested this and tested it and tested it to ensure that even if there are losses, the net gain is still better than or you're still getting a net gain. Right. And from what I understand from talking to Princeton Carbon Works, who had this PowerShift hub inside their new disc wheel, is that they actually made this disc wheel over a year ago, 13 months ago, and it's been sitting on the shelf waiting for a day like today to come out. And so that also tells me that the team have had 13 months to test this to make sure, whatever question marks did surround whatever losses there may or may not be. Myself and Dave Rome, when we reviewed the system, we couldn't really answer that question. We just don't have the technology to test that properly and publish that data. But this would certainly seem to put a lot of those question marks to bed.
So I guess sort of the follow-up there is this makes sense in this particular time trial, right? Mm-hmm. Because you've got a big, long flat. The majority of your time is spent on that flat, right? I mean, the finish times were...
And perhaps it's worth delving into that for a second also, because, what's really going on here is that, as we mentioned, for the flat section, you want, as we've seen basically every rider in time trials these days, you want a larger front chainring, and you want a one-by setup. That gives you both an aerodynamic and a drivetrain efficiency gain. The drivetrain efficiency gain comes from the fact that you basically have lower chain tension for the same gear ratio. You're having the same gear ratio because although these riders are putting on huge 60 and 62 tooth chainrings, they're not using their 11 sprocket at the rear. They're using a sprocket somewhere in the middle of the cassette. And so they've effectively got the same gear ratio. A lot of people hear 60 tooth chainring. How do they turn that? Well, you turn it because it's, you shift gears so that you can turn it.
You got gears in the back.
Yeah, exactly. So unless you're on unless you're in your smallest gear and you're on a steep climb, really and you're looking for more gears to shift into, that's not a factor. So the decreased chain tension coupled with the fact that you're running a straighter chain line, or you're more likely to be running a straighter chain line more often, you're getting some drivetrain efficiency gains by getting rid of the front derailleur and one of the two chain rings at the front. You're also getting somewhat of an aerodynamic gain from that. And then also just from less chain articulation, because the chain is not having to, effectively the chain is going around a larger chain ring, and then you're also pairing that with a larger sprocket at the back. So the chain articulation is less compared to a smaller chainring and a smaller sprocket. I'm not sure if I'm making great sense with that.
The last one makes sense because, like, if you just if you think about taking a chain and bending it, right, the way it's designed to be bent, there's still a little tiny bit of friction there, tiny bit of friction, and every time it wraps around a chain ring, the tighter that wrap is, the more it has to bend, the more.
Yeah, if you imagine,
we're talking tiny little bits.
I was going to give a roundabout analogy there, but given a lot of our listeners in America, perhaps roundabouts are not the best thing to use. So anyway, I think people get it.
We've been adding lots of roundabouts in America, actually. No, so the follow-up question then is, yes, this was maybe the best optimization you could have for this particular time trial with a big flat and then a climb. Are we going to start seeing these things in road races? Because the front derailleur is still it's kind of like it's a kind of a weakness in the system, right? Like drop chains. I mean, probably one of the major fears for every single mechanic in today's stage, other than the Ineos mechanics, was that one shift that was going to happen from the big ring to the little ring at the bottom of that climb, right? And I don't think I spotted anybody going wrong, but it happens, right? It still happens. I mean, think back to Roglic last year, right? With his sort of issue. Although he was on one by, wasn't he?
He was on a one by as well. Yeah, that was a freak accident.
I'm saying that chains fall off, right?
Yeah.
And in general, the likelihood of a chain falling off is less on a one by system. The Roglic incident aside. So are we going to start seeing these things in road racing, or is this slight, even if it's 99%, right? Even if it is the very slight decrease in efficiency, increase in drag in the system, enough to prevent the use in a race where you're going to spend more time in the lower gear, right? Because today you spend most of the time in the big gear, but if the key moment of a race is on Alpe d'Huez, you're not going to be in the big gear. So anyway,
I would say yes and no, and it's not really anything to do with the theoretical or otherwise losses that may or may not exist. The Alpe d'Huez example you give is the easiest and quickest just to sort of answer that. They're taking a direct comparison. If you look again at the article we have on the website now, we took a direct comparison of a 2x setup with a standard rear disc versus the classified 1x setup with the internal 2-speed hub. And there was a 300 gram gain. So on Alpe d'Huez,
yeah,
we know how pros feel about weight. 300 grams is not something they're going to be willing to accept, and that's practically regardless of the rim that you build this into. If you're running a Dura-Ace group set, that 300 grams is going to be it's going to be constant. The yes part of the answer is that we have already seen this in road racing. We've seen Victor Campenaerts, Lotto Destiny use this at Het Nieuwsblad last year. We've seen some Uno X mobility riders use it last year. Tour de Hungary, which is ongoing at the moment, also I think was the last time they used it, or last time I'm aware of. And then you also had yours truly use it for the Ross Telchin stage race last year. And the challenge, or the sort of the hesitation I think that the pros will have, is that should you need a wheel for mutual service, or let me back up a bit. The motivation for me using a Ross Telchin, and also I believe for Victor Campenaerts, was that we then ran 60-tooth chainrings up front, and you're getting all the gains we just talked about. You're also getting, which I learned in racing, hadn't really planned for, was the ability to just ride away from the peloton anytime the road is going downhill, because you have such a huge gear. So while everybody else is spinning out, you're still shifting down the block. But,
and you're terrifying everybody because you just rolled up with a 60.
Yes, exactly. There are a lot of
who is this guy?
There are definitely a lot of psychological gains going on there. The flip side of that, though, is should you puncture, you need to take away from your service, you then only have a 60-tooth chainring. So if there are any other climbs on that course that day, you are going to struggle. And so the backup plan that I sort of had, or the sort of I had included a Vittoria tire liner inside the rear wheel, because if I had a puncture, I wanted the best opportunity to be able to keep riding. And second to that, the backup I had was that I wasn't going to be changing rear wheels. I was going to be changing bikes should I get a puncture. So yeah,
which they do a lot of anyway because of disc brakes, right?
So they do a lot of anyway, but I still think it could well be one of those, like initially when disc brakes started to come into the peloton, the question was what happens if you puncture? It was one of the many questions. And when it's a mix, it's a problem. If something like classified should ever become like ubiquitous or something, then there is no issue, because mutual service has a classified system for you, and the team car has one, and you're always going to get one. But I don't see that happening in the same way that it did with disc brakes. Obviously, we've talked about why this was an advantage on the flat, because they wanted to have those bigger chain rings. But the reason that they had to run the power shift today, as we've already mentioned, but let's just touch on it once more, is that with that climb to the finish, if they had gone with a 66-tooth chainring without the classified, with a standard hub, it just would have been so suboptimal you wouldn't even have considered it. And so every other team today presumably had to either run 2x, which aerodynamically was suboptimal, or they had to run a chainring, a 1x chainring, which they would be able to get up the final climb, but wouldn't be as efficient, let's say, as the Ineos Grenadiers riders had for the 34 kilometers before the climb. And so that's really the crux of it here. They haven't just like optimized for the flat or optimized for the climb. They've optimized for both. They've had their cake and they've eaten it. Where, every other team is sort of wondering what's the best compromise we can come up with. Ineos have completely bypassed the compromise.
Right. So Tadej Pogačar was running a 60-46 double, for example, which ends up being roughly the same as what Ineos was on. And both Pogačar and Ganna were on 11:34 cassettes. So nice wide cassette and roughly the same chainring options.
Well,
just one of the chainrings was magical and one of the chainrings was real.
You say that, but the inner ring that Pogačar had and the effective inner ring that Thomas had were somewhere around 46. But Thomas actually had a 66 tooth chain. I don't know why I'm struggling to say 66 tooth, but he had an extra 6 teeth,
right,
not in his head, on his chain ring for the flat section. Which, I mean, ultimately Thomas just didn't have it in terms of his own. No, just referring to Geraint Thomas. Geraint Thomas didn't have it today, but Ganna, Sheffield, and Arnsman clearly were on good days and were able to maximize. As I've said in the article as well, this is not going to win them the time trial. It's not going to win them the Giro, but it is definitely a gain that might have made the difference today. Ultimately, Pogačar was just on another level, so. He took the win, but the point that I think is, and you've already mentioned it, Caley, but running a 60 tooth chainring with a 46 tooth inner ring, and having to make that shift as you come on to climb.
They're not Durace chainrings. They're some carbon thingy.
Carbon tie TUAE use. We're waiting on photos coming through. I'm pretty sure the chainrings Ineos we're using are going to be Mike. Had that tip off, so I heard that a couple of months back actually. So
it's a big carbon looking thing.
Yeah. But I would be. I'm sure everybody in that team was nervous when they knew that change is about to happen. Is this change going to go smoothly or not? Versus, and I can tell you from experience having ridden this, what all the Ineos riders would have done with the classified system was they would have been full gas, whatever it is, 400, 450 watts or whatever, and shifted without even lifting off the pedals. They can shift the internal gear on that rear hub, which must just give you so much more confidence.
Right. You have it behind you. Can we see it?
Yeah.
Does it look different at all? Like, what can you tell from the outside?
More screens are worse here, so you can tell on this one because you can see classified on the
of course.
On the hub there. You can tell on this one because you can see classified just on the disc rim wall. If I flip it around the other side, you can mostly tell because the through axle on the through axle on the classified system is very different. That's basically a wireless receiver for engaging the shift in the planetary gear. It's also got this little torque arm, which if you just spin the free hub in either direction, it just rotates because the planetary gear system, you need this little arm, this little additional arm. If I pull out the through axle, you need this little additional arm to effectively just like it jams against the brake caliper bolts and effectively just locks the gear. So yeah, there's a few extra pieces to it. If you know what you're looking for, if you know what you're looking for, you can spot them. But it's not like it's a glaringly different setup or anything. It integrates quite neatly.
Well, the last thing before we wrap up this little bonus special episode, anything else that we spotted today? I mean, I can't help but notice that the horrible Visma Lisa bike helmets haven't had much of a result yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's another one of those. It's like, would the bad results have been worse had they not had that helmet?
Right. Right.
possible.
And we talked about this before. It was designed kind of specifically for Jonas Vingegaard, who hasn't now raced since Basque Country, obviously, and won't be back racing until at the earliest, probably the Tour de France. So maybe, I guess here's the question: do you think we're likely to see other members of that team switch to other Giro helmets, because they have lots of sort of probably more, as you put it, like helmets that will work for more people, right? Like some more versatile helmets. Whereas that one helmet is, if you're in the right position, it's probably very fast. But if you're out of that position, it could potentially be incredibly slow, right? Do you think we could see people switch back?
Yeah, that's sort of the big question mark for me with this helmet, because the previous Giro Arrowhead was known for just being like, if you didn't have the opportunity to aero test, that was a safe bet. Go for that helmet. It might not be the fastest, but it's usually fast-ish on most people. There are elements of the new Star Wars Giro Arrowhead 2 that look like it may be even more versatile. It looks like it, you know, it could improve anybody's position, but just being so much bigger, it's like when a helmet's bigger like that, it usually falls into the category of being very, very rider dependent. So I'm sort of really interested to see, you know, as these helmets roll out, and I'm pretty sure, reading between the lines, nobody has said this, but reading between the lines myself, I'm pretty sure that Jumbo-Visma have developed this helmet with Giro. Giro are their new sponsors. There's a UCI commercially available, commercialization rule, forgot my words there, that states that the product has to be made commercially available within 12 months of first being used in a World Tour race. And I'm pretty sure that Giro and the Visma Lease Bike have maybe come to some sort of exclusivity deal for that 12-month period. Because when I inquired about this helmet, I was told it'll be available spring 2025, which coincidentally is about 12 months after they first made an appearance. So we might not get the answer to that question until, you know, independent people start testing it. And it seems like that won't happen until maybe this time next year.
Gotcha. Interesting. I asked for one and they knew I wasn't serious. So they're like, no.
I mean, yeah, like the only thing I would have advised is perhaps you waited closer to Halloween before you asked, because that is the most likely scenario that you would use one.
They're like, so you could wear it around and make fun of it? No, thank you.
Yeah, people know you, Caley. People know you.
All right.
Geraint Thomas did have a new visor. So I've spent.
Oh yeah, with the little, like flippy trippy thingies. Yeah,
gurney flaps.
Yeah, that's the technical term. Flippy trippies.
Yeah. We seen Ganna and Thomas first use these at the prologue in Copenhagen 2 years ago, and this just seems like a bigger version of it. Bigger is better, presumably. But yeah, there's Alex Dowsett did a good video on how they may or may not work. Recently was quite interesting. So yeah, I mean, so I've spent most of the day just writing up this classified piece, so I haven't actually had a chance to delve through the tech galleries just yet and see if there was anything else. I basically only seen the last 10 minutes of the race also, so maybe need to go back and watch more of that to see if there were any other things. Well, but we're going to put this out in the podcast. If anybody else has seen something I missed, just let me know. Give me the Friday evening.
There we go. Message us and we'll talk about it on something next week. All right, there you go. That's the end of our little Giro time trial special performance process episode here. If you're listening to this, you're a member. So thank you for being a member. We really appreciate you. And will be another regular episode next week.